What's up, everyone? Welcome to Will's Personal Development Show. My name is Will Chow, and you're listening to the show. Today, we're going to be helping out millennials. Specifically, this is a question that most millennials talk about, but my audience is specifically catered towards Asian American male millennials. However, I think this is a question that a lot of millennials in general face, and that is how to really not be discouraged by your family or friends telling you that something won't work, or the expectations or managing a disappointment from parents when you want to pursue something that is outside of what your parents want, because it's not something you're passionate about, and you want to try something new, take a little bit of a risk to maybe start your own business or find your own job in a different industry. And so I think this is a question that starts with financial prosperity. A lot of millennials, or just young people in general, they want to be prosperous. They want to be wealthy, and they want to be wealthy for their family. So it's a bit of a paradox, because partially, you're doing this for your family, but your family doesn't want you to do it. So it's kind of like a flip situation. And then with Asian parents, especially, it's even more of a paradox, because your parents usually, generally speaking, want you to be well off. They have good intentions. They want you to be successful and wealthy so that you can provide for yourself, but also so that you can provide for them. But their intentions kind of work against you, because sometimes they want you to have a very rigid set of job titles like doctor or lawyer, which you don't want. So it's working against you in that way. So it seems like a bit of a paradox. Same thing with, going out and doing what you're passionate about and becoming rich in your own way, because, partially you're doing it for yourself. You want to be happy yourself, and partially you're doing it for, your family or your future family, your children or your spouse. So it's always a battle of different motives. You usually, it's oftentimes a struggle between delaying gratification in one area to get results in another. Tony Robbins and many other self-development leaders say that most humans are trying their best to run away from pain and towards pleasure. And we all do this in different ways. Sometimes we will delay short-term pleasure for long-term pleasure at the expense of suffering more short-term pain. We do this all the time, whether it's going to the gym when we don't want to get that better body, or studying and doing homework that we don't enjoy to get better grades, to go to a better school, to get a better job that will make us more money and supposedly make us happier and feel more pleasure in the long run. So we're always kind of throwing out these behaviors, and sometimes they work against us. Sometimes we're delaying future pleasure for short-term pleasure. Maybe it's a party we go to, maybe it's drugs, maybe it's something that isn't beneficial for a long-term benefit, but we take it in. Sometimes it's as simple as the food we eat, the junk food we eat. And it's something that a lot of people struggle with, and we're genetically wired to struggle with, because in the short term, our bodies are more attuned to having immediate gratification. So long-term effects aren't necessarily taken into account. And that doesn't really work for our benefit in the modern age. Back in the day, a few centuries ago, we would die by the time we were 21 just by natural war, famine, and disease. And so long-term thinking really wasn't a thing. So I promise this all ties together, so bear with me here. Long-term thinking wasn't a thing. So when you think about it that way, in the past, it might have made sense to think short-term. But now the people who really succeed, the Warren Buffetts of the world, they really are long-term thinkers, something that we aren't naturally attuned to. They think, okay, how will this affect me when I'm 30, 50, 70, 80 years of age? And because of that, Warren Buffett's been able to use compound interest, and also just by living as a honest, reputable, trustworthy, hardworking person, by using those values, he's also succeeded in his own personal reputation and lived a healthy life by thinking in the long term. Shallow thinking and short-term thinking of trying to do things in the short term, like, trick people or lie to people, don't work in the long term because you get found out and your reputation stays with you. Especially when you're established in one area and you're building a business or trying to spread value. Or if you consider the online era, the internet has all these online review sites, and your reputation sticks with you, and people start to remember you if you make bad decisions. So bringing it all back together, and thinking about you as a young individual in modern society, a world that's constantly changing, how exactly do you make the best decisions so that you're not lost in life, so that you can do what you're passionate about and make a lot of money doing this? And how do you do this when your parents or family are telling you maybe you shouldn't, that's risky, and you want to try something new, maybe start a business, or maybe you want to even skip college. So these are very interesting issues, and nowadays you're bombarded with advice from people like Gary Vaynerchuk, who, sometimes give a bit extreme advice on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is that college is a complete waste of time unless you're trying to become a doctor or lawyer. That's what he says. So when you're bombarded with all this extreme advice, like how it can seem confusing. Where do you turn to? And, how could you possibly take that extreme step when you see most of your peers going to college? So it's a tough dilemma. And I think, when you think about it, it gets even tougher considering that the world's constantly changing. I was speaking at a small event about half a year ago. I was invited to speak through LinkedIn. It was just like this tiny little event. And they just wanted my opinion on, career advice and so forth. And after the event, one Indian college student came up to me, and essentially she had a lot of questions about how can you succeed in a world where it's constantly changing so rapidly? How do you stay relevant when there's this fear of going obsolete? Maybe you learn a skill and you get replaced by robots or technology because technology is changing so quickly. So there's that other fear there of how do you stay indispensable in this world? Now, I'm going to help you answer all these questions. First off, first big thing is you're probably overthinking this too much. You're probably worrying way too much. And if you just apply some of that worrying time to something more productive, such as, spending some extra time on the side to just develop your skills and develop timeless skills, most of this will handle itself. Because you're already thinking preemptively more than most people do. Think about it. Most people don't listen to podcasts. They're out there partying, drinking, not studying, playing video games. So you're already preemptively thinking for the future. So you're already doing fairly well. The next step is to take some action and do some stuff on the side in addition to the average workload of your competitors, and you're going to stay ahead. That extra time of self-investment will pay off. I'm simply here to kind of guide you and kind of help you understand that. So let me explain why this is my big thesis, my big idea. I think most people are just stressing themselves out way too much, beating themselves up too much, and thinking too far ahead. Now, first big thing. I'm not saying that you should just kind of relax and put it on the, back burner and do what the average person does. I think the first big thing is side hustles. I think side efforts, side gigs are one of the keys to staying ahead. And I use that term very loosely because it can come in very different forms. Very extremely different forms. When you usually think of a side gig or side hustle, the common picture is some type of freelance graphic design business online. And that's not a bad example, but also think of a side hustle as something that not necessarily pays you in the form of money, but in the form of wisdom and skill sets that you can apply in the future to make you money or stay relevant in the changing world. So think about that. It's also something that can be used as a backup plan, as a side business to reduce the downside, to reduce the potential consequences of something going wrong, like a bankruptcy or losing your job or a business not working, while keeping the upside. The upside being, you get really rich off of this random idea, crazy idea you had. So I'm going to kind of bring in some examples of successful people. There's plenty more, but side hustles are extremely important. So Michael Dell, a billionaire behind Dell Computers. There's also Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. Those are names most people are familiar with. When you look at these three people, they set up their business when they started to be almost risk-free. So how did they do this? Well, the risk if you start a business is that if you go bankrupt or you go into debt, you're somewhat screwed because now you have no degree to fall back on. And the theory goes that you're starting below the benchmark because you're competing against other people with college degrees when you're applying for a job. Now, first off, I think that whole idea is somewhat off because I think college degrees don't matter as much as you think they do. They matter, but they don't really, you'd be surprised how much emphasis they get when you apply for a job. It's really about what skills can you provide? Can you prove it? But anyhow, going along with the basic general theme, which I think it makes sense. You're in a situation where you have a lot of downside if you try this out, supposedly, if you skip college or you start a business or whatever. So what Michael Dell and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg did is they had a college program to fall back on. So Mark and Bill came from Harvard, and Harvard's program basically allows you to return to school whenever you want. So if you're in the middle of your college session and you want to take a 2 or 7 year break, you can, and then once you return, you can finish up your college degree. On top of that, Bill had tremendous programming skills. So if his business failed and he did somehow randomly get kicked out of Harvard for some random reason, he was very comfortable with his programming skills that he would be able to find a pretty good job. So in his case, it's kind of a trifecta. He was able to invest in himself and create marketable skills. 2, he was able to eliminate downside by being able to return to college at any time. And then 3, he had this side hustle that would have made him more happy, more, enjoyed his life more, and made him a crap load of money if it succeeded, which it did. And now he's the richest person in the world, and he fluctuates in battles with, people every now and then. I think for the last 2 decades, he was battling with Warren Buffett constantly, and now he's battling with pretty much Jeff Bezos for the number one spot, but who cares? He's super rich, ridiculously rich. He could buy 10,000 times more Lamborghinis than the people you see on YouTube, and it still wouldn't phase his net worth. So, what's my big point here? It's not a black and white situation usually. Sometimes if you just think creatively and innovatively, and you shift and sift through the opportunities out there, you can find a decision that actually has more upside and drastically reduced downside. Now, especially with my Asian listeners, I think there's a huge misconception, and I think this is one of the big problems and mistakes of Asian American parents. They have this belief or this behavior that all risk is bad, and that's ridiculous. You step out of the house, you're taking a risk. You breathe, you're taking a risk that the air might not come in, that you might get shot when you walk outside. Does that mean you stay huddled up in your corner doing nothing? So many Asian parents have this risk-averse nature where they're unwilling to do anything that might seem like any bit of a risk, severely reducing their children's potential. Now, that doesn't mean all risks are risks worth taking. What you see the most successful people do, and this is a huge misconception with successful people, is that most people mistakenly believe that successful people take ridiculous risk and then just luck out and succeed. But in reality, they actually take really calculated risk where the downside is very small, if not zero, and then tremendous upside. So Richard Branson comes to mind as a great example. Most people know him as this wild entrepreneur who's always risking stuff and jumping out of planes and stuff. In reality, when he conducts his business, and if you read any of his books, especially Finding My Virginity, he really goes really in depth on this and how he applies it to all his businesses. But especially when you're starting up, he recommends finding opportunities to severely reduce the downside while keeping the upside, and having those asymmetric returns, which is a term that the billionaire Paul Tudor Jones uses as well. You're looking for those. An example would be when he first started his airplane business. There's a tremendous startup cost, right? A simple plane will cost millions of dollars. So he struck a deal with, I believe it was Boeing, to use their plane for a year. And if it didn't work out, he could return the plane for free. If it did work out, well, he was in business. He was making a lot of money from airplanes, and that's what happened. So, there's the downside isn't there anymore. The upside is there. He didn't have to pay for the plane to begin with. So he's very smart with doing that, and I think that's one of the first big things you have to realize. And if you want to learn more about side hustles, really, I suggest checking out Chris Guillebeau's podcast, Side Hustle School. And he also has a book called Side Hustle that recently came out that I read. And both of those go into extreme detail about how there's thousands of people in the world right now who are succeeding by using asymmetric returns and kind of stabilizing their downside with side hustles. And you'll see all these different industries and weird topics and hobbies that they've been able to do this with, from catching and selling frogs in New Orleans to building a software business to an online course business to all sorts of random stuff. Even, Coke bottles and soda bottle side gig companies. And so it's incredibly interesting to kind of see this go through. And I want to emphasize once again, it's not about reducing all risk, because usually it's a competitive world out there. So you're not going to find some Goldilocks magic solution where there's going to be zero risk and tremendous upside. If it's there, which, I wouldn't rule it out. If it does exist, it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and it may take you like 50 years to find it. But generally speaking, there's going to be some risk involved. You're just trying to reduce the downside as much as you can, and there still will be some downside there. But that's kind of what life is about. Like, the reason people take on more risk is because there is more reward if it succeeds. It's common sense, but, Asian American parents sometimes forget it. And, you can feel like they can do no wrong and their advice is always perfect, but that's not the case. I learned this the hard way. When I grew up with my parents, they seemed like they could do no wrong. And so I trusted their advice. They just seemed like very high-performing people because they had come from a different country with almost no money, and they had pulled themselves up and worked so hard and ultimately ended up becoming upper middle class. However, as I grew older, I realized, you know what? Most of my peers, most of these people who are doing so well in school and just kicking butt in school, these Asian American peers, their parents are just low or middle income immigrants. They're not gods who are omniscient and know all the answers. They're just trying to piece it together, and quite frankly, some or not, if not most of their advice may be wrong. Because look at them, they're low or middle income. They're not killing it in the financial department. So they're just trying to piece it together, and many of them are just pulling their own advice out of their butt, not really reflecting or using case studies and examples and scientific research from successful people. So, that's where you kind of get this bad advice from, where this whole idea of like, you shouldn't take any risk whatsoever, or you should take all sorts of risk. That's not the case. There's definitely examples where you should hold back from risk. Even entrepreneurs, that's what they do. I was watching the 2017 Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meeting, which is Warren Buffett's annual meeting with his shareholders. It was streamed online, and his partner Charlie Munger encapsulated this idea beautifully. Some guy in the audience posed this question of, well, did you know that an airplane recently killed 20 people in the airplane crash? Do you think you should still be in the airplane business? And Charlie Munger kind of went on this rant about how before anyone should ask a question, you should really be able to consider all the downsides and positivities and so forth. But then he said, the juice is worth the squeeze. We make millions upon millions of dollars from this. And, of course, there's going to be some accidents when you fly up into the air. That doesn't mean you don't fly at all. And it made a lot of sense to me. When I thought about it, and you look at the statistics, you're much more likely to die from a car crash than an airplane. Like, your car is the most dangerous vehicle and part of your day on a daily basis. So, in effect, the car industry you should be more careful of that. But people aren't like this because they don't look at things and judge things by the numbers. Instead, they just use their emotions, and they see this big plane going up into the sky, and that looks more dangerous, or painful, falling to your death from the sky than, getting crushed by another car. So they think, oh, surely airplane crashes are more frequent and more catastrophic. So take it through. That's not always the case. Use the numbers, because what we believe may not actually be what's the case. So now let's touch on the topic of like, well, should you go to college? Should you start a business? I really think you should try these things out on the side. You can always test and test and test. For example, maybe you're not sure if you can or can't get a job with or without a college degree. Try testing this out. Like, send a bunch of applications and apply for jobs, real jobs, with and without your college degree mentioned on your resume. And split test this and test it with 100 different applications and get at least 5 to 10 interviews and see, does this actually make an influencing difference? You can actually see this out. So this is something that real people have done in the past. One of them being Julian from a dating company called Real Social Dynamics. And he did this, and apparently there was no difference whatsoever. And all this time he thought that his college degree mattered in a sense, but it didn't. And so think of it through that lens. And then there's other ways of testing. You could start a side gig, see if it works, see if entrepreneurship is really all you've dreamed it up to be. And by testing it this way and getting real experiences, you might realize this is not what I like doing. And then you just save yourself a bunch of heartache and you can return to school. So my opinion with like college and like doing these things is like, you can always test. You can always test on the side. Let's say you really want to be a painter and your parents want you to be an engineer. Well, you can paint on the side. That's literally what Ninja did. Ninja's like one of the top video game streamers right now, playing Fortnite. And he had like a job and then like a side job, and he was able to fit in like a couple hours of playing this video game, Fortnite, when he could. And he's a huge proponent of this. He went on to like a national TV show recently. It wasn't Good Morning America, but it was like one of those like CNBC like morning news interviews, and that's what he did. He emphasized dramatically like, have a side hustle. Don't like, by doing it this way, like, there's no downside. If it grows into something, then you can, once you're comfortable, once it, supersedes your full-time income, then you can kind of like move into that. And that's what he did. That's how he makes hundreds of thousands of dollars currently playing Fortnite. I don't know if that will be the case once the game starts to die as a trend, but still, he's doing very well as of this current moment from playing that game. He's one of the best in the world at the game. So, that's one way of really testing your passions and your experiences while eliminating downside. And I think that's really important, because another big mistake people make is that they have this theory of how amazing or fun something is. And they're like, oh, wouldn't it be great to be a cruise director and just like sail on cruises all day? And then when they try it out, it's miserable because they're seasick all the time and you're always cleaning toilets. And so until you really try it out, your passion may not be what you think your passion is. So in conclusion, wrapping this whole thing up, there are ways of testing this out and really, delivering it. And then once you finally get to that point of transitioning, that's when you can kind of prove to your parents, to other people, that it is financially viable and it is something that they really after. Because when you look at the core appeals of what drives people, they just want you to be wealthy. They just want you to be happy. And if you can statistically, numerically prove that this pays just as much as a doctor or more, you can help them. And then, ultimately, sometimes with parents, you have to sometimes cut the cords a little bit and just choose what you want over what others want. Because, some parents, they'll never be happy. And you just want to be happy with what you want. Maybe you don't want to be rich. You just want to enjoy your job. And your parents don't like that. And nothing you'll say will stop that. Well, you have to cut the cord and do what you want to do. Otherwise, you'll be filled with resentment and regret. Thanks for listening.